All right, good morning. We are live. Monday morning edition of Coffee with Rich. Today I'm joined again by my dear friend, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Brothers. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
All right. Let's see. We have overcome some operational difficulties. We're back on the net once again. I got some sponsors I want to talk about to keep the lights on around here at the American Warrior Show. We have some amazing sponsors, as you know, Lieutenant Colonel Brothers, like Century Martial Arts, makers of the Bob XL. Bob XL is an amazing striking opponent, as well as a pretty darn decent jiu-jitsu opponent, and it's a three-dimensional shooting target. You can shoot the heck out of these things. They don't mind. They'll take all the 5.5 sticks you got, take it to the range with you, and wear it out. Century Martial Arts. You can find a deep discount for all of our amazing sponsors in the American Warrior Show link in the description below. And all of our sponsors have deep discounts for those that watch Coffee with Rich. Of course, my name is Rich Brown, co-host, co-founder of the American Warrior Society and the American Warrior Show, which is America's #1 self-defense podcast. Looks like we got John on from Yukon, Oklahoma, coin number 1919. Gordon Boston, good morning, sir. Coin number 1688 up there in Ohio. Tony is on. Jesse, Will. Lots of folks joining us, almost 20 folks already. Please like and share. We're going to talk about China with Lieutenant Colonel Brothers, and I will tell you why he is the person to talk to in just a moment. But first, let's get some sponsors out of the way. APPHemp.com is AppalachianStandard.com, and Jesse Ross and I were in the Marines together. Jesse and his beautiful family are growing the finest CBD products money can buy. They are true artisan hemp growers up there in the beautiful mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. You definitely want to go check them out. I've been rubbing CBD salve on my beautiful wife, Miss Lisa, lately, and it has been working incredibly well. As you know, she's had back surgery, and her it's been kind of hurting, but that has been taking care of it, believe it or not. So please check them out. Coolfire Trainer, you want to take your dry fire game to the next level? Please check out Coolfire Trainer. We got a discount for them in today's show notes, but you're going to have to wait about 2 months because with the ammo shortage, everybody's been wanting to get into the Coolfire game. So please check them out. It's your gun, your trigger, your sights. It's not some other product. You change out the barrel and the recoil spring, and you have an amazing training tool. Mountain Man Medical, the co-branded trauma kit is out. Please pick up a copy of one of those today. Put it in your car, put it in your home, put it in your kitchen. Send it with your kids in their vehicles. It will definitely keep them safer. Last but not least, PrecisionHolsters.com, maker of the belt that I'm wearing right now, the amazing tactical belt that they have over at Precision Holsters. Please check them out. John and his team are making some amazing products right here in America, veteran-owned products, and you're going to want to check them out. Competition line, if you're into that sort of thing, as well as an amazing Ultra Appendix holster. Randall is on, says, hi, Rich. Ed is on. Ed and I were in the Marines together. Wade is on. My beautiful wife, Miss Lisa, is on. Mark Few, good morning, sir. Please hit that share button. We are going to talk about China and as well as what's going on in Afghanistan. But first, let me welcome Lieutenant Colonel David Brothers to the show. Dave was commissioned as second lieutenant in September of 1999 after completion of the basic school and the logistic officers course. In 2000, he reported to headquarters of Service Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment in Kaneohe Bah, Hawaii. Second Lieutenant Brothers served as the S4, the S4 Alpha, and Motor Transport Platoon Commander and supported annual training events in the Indo-PACOM region of operations for the next 3+ years. First Lieutenant Brothers was selected for recruiting duty, Semper Fi, in late 2003 and was transferred to become the Executive Officer Recruiting Station Louisville, and that's where Lieutenant Colonel Brothers and I served together and spent our time in Stalag, Louisville. In 2006, Captain Brothers entered the Marine Corps Reserve, starting with Marine for Life program, and quickly led that billet as the regional OIC, or officer in charge, for the Wounded Warrior Regiment in support of the Eastern Seaboard. Major Brothers was assigned to the General Staff of Marine Corps Forces Reserves in New Orleans, Louisiana, starting in 2009. He was assigned as the Military Construction Plans Officer there in 2011, at which time he attended Resident Command Staff at the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama. Following graduation in 2012, Major Brothers was assigned as the China Plans Officer, G5 Division, Marine Forces Pacific in Camp Smith, Hawaii. After 2 years in that position, Major Brothers was promoted to the position of Plans Chief, overseeing the development of all strategic plans effort related to the Marine Corps within the Pacific Theater. Lieutenant Colonel Brothers received orders to Force Headquarters Group, Marine Force Reserves, New Orleans, Louisiana in 2015, where he was assigned as the Force Level Logistics Officer. He remained in this position until 2018, when he was selected to attend top-level schools at the Naval War College. Following graduation from the War College, Lieutenant Colonel Brothers was assigned as Executive Officer for Deployment Processing Command West aboard Area 64. This is the command that Lieutenant Colonel Brothers is currently retiring from. Lieutenant Colonel Brothers has a bachelor's from Florida State, a master's from the Air War College, an MBA from Gordon Ford College of Business, a master's from the Naval War College, and a master's from the Whitman School of Management, Syracuse University. He has been married to his lovely bride, Miss Denise. For the last 21 years, they have 2 children, Owen and Izzy. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Rich. I'm happy to be here.
Quite an impressive bio.
Thank you.
Jeff is on. Good morning, my brother. Dan is on. Will Parker out there in beautiful Montana. So happy to have you guys on this morning. Walt is on. Tony said, behind every Marine is a damn recruiter. You better believe that, pal. Out there taking the pain. And we definitely took the pain. So, Lieutenant Colonel Brothers, I've had you on here before. I believe I asked you this before, but let me ask you one more time. What does that amazing bio overlook about you?
I was raised in eastern Kentucky on the border of West Virginia. The reason I kind of point that out is whenever I have the opportunity, I like to throw a marker down that despite J.D. Vance's very interesting book, Hillbilly Elegy, not everybody in the Appalachians is a drug addict, a serial social service abuser, or anti-intellectual.
I couldn't agree with you more. Nick Wallace is on. Good morning, Nick. We're in the Marines together as well. Semper Fi, my friend. Hope you're doing well out there. Let's see. So, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, man. I think that stereotype, another stereotype that really irks me is the vet stereotype, where they live under a bridge somewhere and it's just absolute foolishness. Or they're a sociopath or something. They just can't get it together. Couldn't be further from the truth, in my opinion. Dave, as you know, we spent the last several shows discussing the events in Afghanistan, which continues to obviously grow more dangerous and more troubling as the days go by. As Afghanistan works to take all the air out of the room, is there anything out there that you think we aren't looking hard enough at right now?
My answer to this question is always going to be the People's Republic of China. You know, if I was watching C-SPAN over the weekend, and I think it was late Saturday afternoon, POTUS made a statement that just stopped me dead. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but not much. The Kremlin, I guess, we're not the Soviets anymore, but Russia and China want us to be in Afghanistan. And that just whacked me right between the running lights, because it took me the next day to try and rationalize the statement, against our U.S. foreign policy choices over the last 20 years. And, I kind of understand the logic of what he's saying. But the shift in thinking that saying something like that from a sitting president, that's a little bit breathtaking.
It is breathtaking. And speaking of something that the president said, of course, this isn't in our kind of, the questions that I had to ask you, but I think it's timely since we're talking about what some statements POTUS has made recently that kind of raise an eyebrow. And that is, in his 28-minute speech after the 13 service members were killed in Kabul in the attack by ISIS-K, he said something that I just thought was like, why would you say that? And the statement was, and again, paraphrasing, something like, I've been in communication with the generals, mostly by letter. I thought that was a very odd phrase for the commander-in-chief in one of the greatest foreign policy crises in the last couple generations to say that. And I know he's reading off a teleprompter, so I don't know if that was inserted by some very keen speechwriter to try to give us code of what's going on. But if you're the commander-in-chief dealing with this, why would you be only reading letters that are sent to you by the generals? That just seems like 19th century Lincoln hunkered down mentality. It just didn't make sense to me. Did that phrase raise any eyebrows to you?
Well, anytime anybody in the 21st century says the word letter, you're going to kind of be caught by the irony of it. I'm certainly not high enough up in the food chain to comment on, what the mechanics of that is. I just, from my perspective, I think every National Security Council works with an immense degree of difference, not only between the president, between staffers that he brings on and takes off. Additionally, it's hard. It's always hard to tell how far down in the weeds any commander in chief is going to be, whether he's on daily conference calls with his commanders, or whether he just wants sit reps when they feel it is appropriate to send those to him. Who's to say? I certainly don't have any knowledge about how the current POTUS operates with respect to the internal mechanics of his staff.
No, nor do I. And one of the things that you used to say when we worked together, was something about how I think it was a staff has to kind of bend the mattress to fit through the commander's window. Do you remember that phrase?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, when I was on the staff at Indo-PACOM, we not only served Lieutenant General Terry Roebling, we also ended up serving Lieutenant General John Tulin. And if you remember that name, General Tulin was the same Colonel Tulin that made the forward push north after the sitting I think it was regimental commander decided that was risky and pushed back. And this was OIF 2. Well, General Tulin was the infantryman's infantryman. General Roebling was the aviator's aviator. Just from that perspective, due to the way their minds work, having been in their particular branch for, in each case, 30 plus years, you have to say things differently to ensure that the stuff that they automatically pick up on is not the only thing that they automatically pick up on. And that rapidly becomes an art form, because as any staff officer will say, the boss can only process so much information at one time, and you as the staff officer had better know what the most important piece of information for that human being to process is. Mm-hmm. That's your job as a human inbox. And if you can take a 30-page white paper and summarize it into 3 sentences, you're still 2 sentences too long.
Sure. Yeah. Gun Jitsu podcast is on. That can only mean that my jiu-jitsu coach, Cody Hudson, is on. I will see you, sir, tonight on the mats. Take it easy on my back's a little tweaked, so don't smash me too hard. Yeah, Dave, I want to go back to that. When President Biden said the generals are communicating to me via letter, he didn't say via VTC, video teleconference, which is what most people are probably familiar with. The president sitting in the Situation Room receiving some VTC. And if there are letters being sent to him, it would seem to me that they could be intercepted by someone who is perhaps the power behind the throne. And again, I don't want to be conspiratorial, but it just seemed like a strange turn of phrase to say something like that. Skip says, good morning from overcast and windy Arab, Alabama. My jiu-jitsu coach, Cody Hudson, says that makes 2 of us. LOL. Let's go on to the next question, Dave. China, you mentioned that the big thing right now is China. So can you develop that story a little bit more? I'm sorry.
From my perspective, and Rich, I'm going to come at this. I am not a former action guy. I'm a counter of the beans. So I'm going to kind of give you the counter of the beans perspective. What a JDAM costs roughly.
Explain a JDAM for those that don't know.
You'd ask me acronym failure. Joint DA munition.
It's a missile, right?
Yes. Well, it's a giant bomb with various ways you can configure it, but it's an enormous bomb.
Joint direct attack munition.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Those run about $20,000 a unit. And that's after all the research costs and all the fancy things that they do. So every time one of those gets dropped, that's at least $20,000 just for the steel hanging off the plane that gets put onto the ground. Okay, so how do you get it over the target? Well, now you got to hang it on something, and it can hang on all kinds of platforms. But for the sake of this discussion, let's say that we hang it on a B-52. A B-52 costs about $70,000 per flight hour. So you've got a $20,000 bomb hanging on an aircraft that costs about 70 grand to fly for every hour it's in the air. Okay, well, how are you getting it there? Okay, well, you're flying it there, but in order to get it off the ground, by which I mean the B-52, you got to fuel it up. Well, now you're having to move fuel, and let's say that you're fueling out of one of the air stations nearby, or possibly that may have used to be in the area. You got to move that avgas across miles and miles of non-permissive territory, which is going to incur all kinds of effects all on its own. So you get the fuel there, you put it in the air. In order for that bomb to get on somebody's forehead, you've got a JTAC or a controller on the ground who is talking to some sort of higher headquarters that is processing that request all the way through the Joint Force Air Component Commander, the JFAC, who is the Air Force commander in the area. And then it goes through the JPITL, the Joint Integrated Priority Targeting List, and is served by the ATO, which is the Air Tasking Order. So you just developed 5 to 6 layers of staff going up possibly to a 2 to 4 star, given what you're shooting at. So you put that on the ground, you've now spent about $300,000. Well, and let's kind of add it up. It's not just cash. You've spent about $300,000. You spent about, 50 to 200 man hours, expeditionary man hours, because most of those humans are not, they're not going home at 5 o'clock. You've crossed many, many miles via convoys in non-permissive territory, and you've probably incurred, at least the risk of casualties, depending on how much gas you've been trying to move. At some point, depending upon what target you're shooting at, the question becomes, what level of value in the target or number of enemy combatants does using such an expenditure justify? And that's a pretty inflammatory question, because once you start justifying the use of weapons in terms of the resource to kill, well, you get into some very, very ticklish areas. So that discussion in and of itself is way above my pay grade. The point I'm making is, in order to prosecute any target, you have incurred a large dinner bill to get that done. And the important part about that, walking it kind of back to China, is that you have to serve the economy of force. So Karl von Clausewitz said, he invented a lot of principles of war that are still valid today. One of them was the economy of force, which says you better be really good at balancing efficiency and effectiveness. And to put that in kind of meathead terms, if you're using a JDAM on 20 human beings in CENTCOM, you're not using that JDAM, or really specifically, you're not marshaling the resources required to deliver it and using the potential threat of that weapon system through the act of deterrence. The reason I found POTUS's comment so kind of breathtaking is because, it's all over the news now in the last 12 hours, but even 48 ago, that had been the first time that I had heard a direct linkage between resources expended in Afghanistan and our ability to credibly deter China and Russia. It had been under discussion at the ditch digger level where I was, but I don't think I had heard POTUS make the connection of that dynamic ever. And that's a giant dynamic to connect.
Tell me more about that.
Well, again,
why was that so striking to you from what you were doing down in the weeds?
The United States military, for anybody who's been in it, is not run by a profit and loss sheet. It's not, and whereas we have a dynamic of, hey, we need something, and you're a grunt rich, and I love grunts, but they all kind of have the same. We need more things to get this done, and we need them faster. And oh, by the way, throw 3 pizzas and some hot wets in there for morale. And that's certainly not. If I was doing the job of a grunt, I would be saying the same thing. And
a hot wet, just for those of y'all that maybe making, is not what you think. It's coffee, it's soup, it's not something else. Let's keep this. Go ahead.
But we very rarely, or at least we attempt to service every request that is levied. And I'll say to the staff, and when I say the staff, I guess I'm talking about all the people who are out there who are not going pew, 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 who are trying to think about, okay, where do all the, and I'll say this, every grunt becomes a shitter and an eater when you're sitting in the S4 processing the waste they produce and providing them with chow to make more. You have to think about what they need and then come at it aggressively. And DOD is very good at that. DOD does its best to provide the resources that are requested from the ground. Now, it doesn't always do it in a timely fashion. We could go back to the beginning of the war and kind of talk about armor. But having said that, when these guys are requesting things, and even operators forward requesting fire support, I think that there is a very strong effort being made to provide those resources in a timely fashion and to win the war through what I'll call superior logistics availability, meaning, is anybody going to bat their eye if there's 10 guys up there that receive the benefit of a $300,000 JDAM? I don't know. I'm not in those rooms, but because it is such a mature theater logistically, meaning that we have the ability to get most, if not all of our resources, or we had the ability to get most, if not all of our resources into CENTCOM, at least within very close range of where they were needed, without having contested airspace, without having contested supply lines. That makes it a different animal. I mean, those pizzas get delivered, using kind of a cheap metaphor. But throughout the course of the war, Rich, and you can tell me if you've heard differently, we have never, even through the pivot that President Obama, I think, started to discuss in 2016, we have focused on CENTCOM as the major game and maybe not focused on other areas of the world as strongly. And at the end of the day, CRA is demonstrative of this. Those dollars are finite and scarcity is real. So at some point, there's going to be a no on this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And I think large scale service level programmatics that are maybe not as visible as troops in contact in CENTCOM will have to pay the bill for other things. And that's facilities, that's infrastructure, that maybe IT upgrades, that's all kinds of things that will not bear the burden or will not show the wear and tear of that burden until 5, 10, 15 years down the road. But once that has been established, that's a tough decision point now because there's going to come a point at which the U.S. can't do everything. Yeah. And I think we're rapidly approaching a time when we're going to have to decide what doesn't get done. And that is a very, very, very hard decision to communicate between, the Joint Staff level and POTUS.
Yeah. And I want to touch on a couple of things you mentioned there, Dave. One of them is, and most people, you never ever hear about this, but it speaks to something you said. There are other elements within the government that need to be utilized. You said something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And if you look at the acronym DIME, DIME, a lot of folks aren't aware of that. You know, these are the elements of, I guess, the coercive use of national power. D being diplomacy, I being intelligence, M military, and E economic ways that we can exert our will on our adversaries. And I think right now everybody's so narrowly focused on the military option, but remember we have DIME. And to your point earlier, Dave, too, about what does it take to put a JDAM, $25,000 JDAM on a truck that may or may not contain one of the ISIS-K leaders. That was a great explanation for those that aren't aware of that. But it also extends further than that. If we're going to fly planes over something, we got CSAR aircraft, search and rescue aircraft, that are there to pick up those pilots in case they go down. Now, that CSAR aircraft need a base. So you got the State Department, before we can ever even overfly a country, making deals with it. In Afghanistan's case, we had to make deals with Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, some other countries to put some forward operating bases in there before we could even fly the first plane. Now, to your point also, Dave, this is uncontested airspace. This isn't World War II where we go up and we're fighting Messerschmitts off of us. You know what I mean? I mean, we own the skies. But in a potential scenario with China or even Russia, I don't know that we may eventually achieve air supremacy, but it wouldn't be a foregone conclusion, would it?
That is a giant question. And there are certainly better minds than I that could answer about what PRC, and we're talking the PLAF, so the People's Liberation Army Air Force capability. But no, I would never, I don't think anybody would ever say that is a foregone, air supremacy is a foregone conclusion. Because what's the last time we fought for air supremacy, air superiority? I believe it was Vietnam. I might be wrong about that, but Robin Olds against brand new MiGs at the time. I don't, and you know, Rich, I think you've seen this as well, because you and I are of a certain generation of Marines. When I came in and went to 1-3 back in 2000, we were still processing the series of Humvees that had originally been out as the Humvee and not the Jeep, right? And we had 7 tons, or it was 5 tons, excuse me, that could be fixed with a file and a Phillips head screwdriver. We were going through the Clinton era drawdowns that were still kind of in effect prior to another rebuild. And when we did exercises, we did major, CACs, major peer-on-peer competitor kind of things, with a focus on artillery that supported maneuver, a focus on large-scale regimental staff kind of moving upwards, all on acetate, I would like to point out, which is a very difficult medium to work on.
You want to explain that for those that don't oblige that?
Advent of the modern COC with Blue Force Tracker and all of the screens, we used to do everything with a paper map that was stuck to the wall. And then in order to communicate maneuver or any kind of COP, which is the common operating picture, you took a piece of clear plastic, which we called acetate. You pinned it on top of the map, and you drew things with your grease pen, and then you kept 5, 10, sometimes 20 different acetates to demonstrate the different courses of action that you might want to brief to the commander, who then had his own map, and sometimes all of this was done between a dirt floor in the COC and getting on TAC 1 and trying to kind of communicate what you were visually working with to 5 different guys who would hear maybe a third of what you were saying. It was a really difficult, although I look at it because acetate has never given me technical problems. So
that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's true. And COC is, of course, Combat Operations Center. When I'm like, during Desert Storm, I was in the COC. And I said, it's not what you imagine. It's exactly what you said. It's a dirt floor, some Humvees backed in with a cami net over the top of it, grease pencils or alcohol pens and acetate and maps. I mean, it's nothing sexy about it. Very, very, I think that someone from the general staff of Robert E. Lee and the Army in Northern Virginia would walk in and go, yeah, okay, this looks about right. We had canvas knitting back then.
But I guess the point I'm making is we were still kind of children of the Cold War, informed by the Balkans.
Correct.
Well, as of 2003, it was all coin all the time. And it's still, you know, if you
and coin is counterinsurgency operations.
As anybody who is probably a major or better or higher in the Marine Corps right now has just got coin burned into their brainstem. And I guess what kind of occurs to me from that is we will yet again, as the old men that we are, watch the pendulum swing aggressively the other way back towards, you know, and this kind of started already, intelligent conversations about the Fulda Gap, about landing on the peninsula, about, you know, the requirements it takes to move massive levels of force at, you know, division or better within a contested area that does not have air superiority, to a transition from movement to maneuver that may or may not be easy to make. It will not occur within a square of territory that we call CENTCOM, which has very mature supply lines, you know, Pizza Huts, and that sounds pejorative. I don't mean it to sound that way. I just think we're going to have to start thinking at a different scale of operation, because we've been occupying a niche of the range of military operation for 20 years now. And our officer corps is very good at it, but we have had to pay for that with decisions that took our focus away from other things. And, you know, dialing down armor and kind of rediscussing artillery. I think I read the other day, you know, it was a friend of mine, he called me, he's an artillery officer. He was talking about Russia, and he said Russia never stopped mastering artillery. And in the study of the Ukraine, they were dropping steel with precision and overwhelming mass on a regular basis, which that's kind of a terrifying idea, I think, if you're a ground guy. Mortars are one thing, but I can't imagine a real artillery exchange on the order of World War I, World War II.
And I want to unpack a couple of things you said there, Dave. You know, for those that are watching this morning, the Fulda Gap was something that when I came in the Marine Corps in 1989, we just knew we were going to be fighting the Soviets in the Fulda Gap as they streamed into Europe. That was the thinking, and that's where all the effort and planning was focused. But now to your point, CENTCOM is basically the geographical region containing the Middle East. Okay, I'm oversimplifying it, but that's what Dave is saying. We have been so focused, we as the U.S. military, in CENTCOM's area of operations for so long, and focused solely on coin operations, counterinsurgency operations. I think Dave's point is that we have some of the supply lines and some of the things that we had to fight that next war, be it Russia or China, have really fallen away. Or maybe North Korea. North Korea is making some pretty drastic moves of late. I don't know if you saw that, Dave. They are getting their nuclear program up and going again. I got another question for you, though, sir. You said earlier that you were not an expert on this, and you didn't believe such a thing even existed. Can you clarify that and kind of roll out why you made that distinction?
Well, let me kind of just make one more statement about major force war, and then I'll answer the expert question, if that's all right with you, Rich.
Yes, please.
Everybody has their opinion, and I'm certainly not a PhD in history, but I think there's a good diagnostic, and that diagnostic is who is the most terrifying commander of World War II. And the reason I say that is because it's a very insightful way of finding out what a certain person focuses on, whether they're an aviator or whether they're a subsurface officer or a SWO or what flavor of conflict do you kind of focus on, and what is your domain expertise? Air, water, below the water, ground. To me, that is absolutely Karl Dernitz. I think Karl Dernitz was the most terrifying human being of World War II. I'm glad he did not get more traction than he got. And the reason I think Karl Dernitz, and let me kind of, if you don't know who Karl Dernitz is, Karl Dernitz was a Wolfpack commander who was part of the subsurface fleet for the was the Reichsmarine, I think they called it, the German Navy. Well, Admiral Dernitz came up with the idea, and he basically was the first guy to ask the very simple question: why are we going against peers or worrying about putting ourselves in danger against gray hull fleets when we could be addressing these giant, fat, juicy targets that merchant marine convoys represent? And while he was not the first to kind of come at the idea of the contested line of communication, I think he took it to a different order of magnitude. Thousands and thousands and thousands of short tons of supplies, merchant marines, you know, he was after them all the time, every day. And he was such a powerful change to what the practice was at the time, that had it gone a little bit differently, or he'd done a little bit better in the Atlantic, I think that very much could have altered at least the naval engagement aspect of the war. And smarter guys than me may have a different opinion on that. The reason Karl Dernitz is worth reading about now, though, is because the United States has never, at least in my lifetime, has never dealt with a contested supply line or a contested line of communication. Here's what I mean. When we want to go somewhere, and the technical term is when we want to conduct forced closure, which is to take Rich Brown in his full loadout with 3 days of supply on him and his 2,000 buddies and put them next to a town that needs to be addressed by those 2,000 Marines. We just kind of throw everybody on the Sweet Pickles van and take them out there and do it. And it you know, could be gray hull, could be black hull, could be craft. Okay. That has been the way we do things, you know, forever. One of the major ways that a peer competitor changes that is as you go to get on your craft flight to take you to wherever, you know, suddenly a cyber operation shuts it down. Or when you're halfway over the Pacific, Atlantic, whatever your route is, suddenly, you know, 6 aircraft or 1 long-range fighter or whomever now finds you and takes that entire aircraft out of the sky. I mean, there's a million different results on what happens when someone who can contest a line of communication chooses to do so. So I say that because the shift in thinking necessary to go from counterinsurgency and CENTCOM to something else that looks like a peer competitor on the order of China is it's an order of it's many orders of magnitude different. And I think if we're going to get into that world and start to think about that as a military problem set, it's almost going to require a post-Vietnam-like purge of thinking and personnel and a total regeneration of new blood who are focused on the scale of peer-to-peer competition.
I totally agree with you, brother. I don't think we have the stomach for the kind of casualties that requires. And I'm just going to throw 2 out there. The Battle of Okinawa. This is just one battle in the Pacific, the battle to take Okinawa, the southernmost point in the Ryukyu Islands that was on the way to Japan. Here we go. 12,520 Americans killed, 38 to 55,000 wounded, 221 tanks destroyed, 12 destroyers sunk, American destroyers, 15 amphibious ships sunk, 9 other ships sunk, 386 ships damaged, 763 aircraft lost. That's one island. You think that might be a fluke? Let's look at the one before it, Iwo Jima. 26,000 total casualties. That's 6,821 American Marines killed, over 19,000 wounded, 1 escort carrier sunk, 1 fleet carrier sunk, 137 tanks destroyed. You know, if we have small, and again, every Marine's life is and service member's life is precious. Absolutely, I get it. As a father, as a retired Marine officer, I understand that. We don't have the stomach for the losses. Number one, the losses of material. To your point, though, is all those ships had a job off the coast of Okinawa, right, Dave? And that is sending materials and men ashore, keeping those men fed and watered and refueled and refitted. And every one lost was another chink in that supply chain, a big blow to the supply chain. We've had zero problems with supply chain. I think that was your point, right? None. And we've had no problems forever, right?
We haven't even faced a competitor who can meaningfully challenge it. I mean, we don't worry about jets flown by ISIS-K shooting at, because we know that, hell, they couldn't read the manual. So, you know, we don't think they'll go to flight school, at least not military flight school. So, yes. And someone who can challenge that is a very terrifying prospect. And you're absolutely right. And bear in mind that the cost in men and material that we as a nation saw in the Pacific was a tiny fragment of what we experienced in the European theater. The Pacific was enormous, but it was dwarfed by the level of casualties and expenditures that were processed against the Germans.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I was just, as you were saying that, I was thinking of the bombing of Dresden. You know, how many people did that kill? I mean, conservatively, the bombing of Dresden occurred over 2 days, and we killed like 27,000 Germans in one little bombing campaign. I don't know that we, to TC's point, I want to read Dr. Fuller's point. Do you believe our population would stand for a peer-to-peer war? Rich's point about casualties is critical. Do we have the political will any longer to fight Russia or China in an actual war? Your thoughts?
This is a good segue to the question that I never answered for you, which is experts.
Yes, it is.
Let's Dr. Fuller, I would be interested to hear to read your comments on this. When you go into any degree of planning, and certainly I was not very high up there, but you can turn on CNN, Fox News, et cetera, and you will experience the expert. There's a great guy named Tom Nichols, who is a professor at the Naval War College, who wrote a book called The Death of Expertise. And in that book, which kind of summarizes this point, he says, okay, we don't respect our experts enough, and we don't do what they tell us to do. We challenge them, or we say, I know better than you, et cetera. In that, he kind of, and you can watch any of his interviews. He's got a bunch of 1 hour, 1.5 hour interviews on YouTube. He makes the comparison of himself, which he's a Russia guy, speaks Russian. He was a Cold Warrior, to a surgeon who says, okay, well, you have an opinion on how I'm going to take your pancreas out. Got it. Here, I'm going to slide the scalpel over to you and you do it yourself. I think that's a little bit, I'd have to say there's a little bit of rhetorical slide in there, in so much as a very technical and tangible skill like removing somebody's appendix is in no way similar to trying to predict what the Politburo Security Council and the PRC is going to do. We have a lot of people who presume to say, I am an expert, and then they put a country after it or a region. They say, I'm an expert in Kazakhstan, or I am an expert in Russia. I got it. But every time I hear that, Rich, I think to myself, okay, got it. But show me one expert in the United States. Does such a human being exist? Is there someone who is an expert in the entirety of the United States, which I guess you could kind of summarize as saying, show me an expert in the geopolitical affairs of the United States. I don't think any such animal is alive. And if you can't have an expert in the United States because it's too big and it's too complicated and there's too many moving parts, I struggle to understand how there's an expert in any other nation unless that human being can, with perfect accuracy, predict exactly what the standing regime of that nation is going to do within the next 48 to 72 hours.
That's a good point. And I would submit, too, that the people that we label as an expert is incredibly skewed. I'll give you one of many examples, and I know that the folks watching this morning have probably seen it many times. So I was watching Fox the other day, and they had a panel. It was 4 talking heads, 2 males, 2 females. The females were very attractive by any standard of beauty. And one of them was very young looking female, and it said that she was an expert in, I don't know, let's say the national security or whatever. So I'm like, wow, she seems awful young and attractive to be this expert in national security that she's being labeled as. So let's go to her LinkedIn. So I did. And the first thing I saw, she has a bachelor's from the University of Tennessee here in Knoxville. I'm like, oh, cool. And that was it. According to this, never been anywhere, never did anything. She had a bachelor's in journalism and had been a media consultant at the Beltway, and that was it. And I'm like, you got to be freaking kidding me. And this is the person that's on one of the largest cable news networks in the world, and we're calling her an expert. I just don't. I think that the people don't know what an expert truly is, if that's what they're saying. Yeah.
And I kind of, you'll get this, Rich, because I, as Marines, we have the opposite of the expert. We have the commander, right? And let me explain that, because that's what I'm not. I am not saying that commanders are not experts. What I am saying is that an expert, as I see it in the United States, is all knowledge and no responsibility. And we can question the knowledge kind of all day. A commander, especially by the Marine Corps standard, is all responsibility for a very ambiguous situation, regardless of how much that human knows or has experience with that situation. Hey, commander, you're on, and you'll either get the result that you are charged to get, or, you're still responsible for acts of God, even though you aren't God. So I think as we move forward, especially in any discussion of China, and let me pull it all the way back to Dr. Fuller's question, there's going to be experts coming out of every orifice when it comes time to debate, predict, discuss what China is going to do and why it's going to do it, yada, yada, yada. None of that matters until it becomes time for one human being to get charged with making a decision that human being then has to take responsibility for. And that is a kind of a skin in the game question. So I guess when I look at experts, and Rich, you can kind of yell back at me on this, I don't want to hear from experts. I want to hear from the guy who's going to have to hit the beach at Hainan Island, and maybe he can tell me what he thinks, if it's a good idea or not. That's just one point of view. So I'm not saying experts don't know anything. I'm saying that it is very popular to be an expert because, quite frankly, we do a poor job as a nation of double checking whether their predictions were anywhere close to what actually happened.
No, well said. To Dr. Fuller, just made another interesting point. He says, I agree with your point on experts. In our modern society, feelings seem to trump facts. Opinion trumps expertise and experience. So if we were to lose a ship to a Russian sub with 1,000 killed in action, our military planners know it is the price of war, but some reporter is going to put a sailor's mom weeping and mourning all over the internet, making for a vastly outsized political impact. It makes for great fodder for those with an agenda. Yeah, I mean, something like the Sullivan brothers, 5 brothers killed on one ship sunk, could not happen today. I remember I had Dr. Cronin on recently. Dr. Cronin is a professor of international politics, and he mentioned in passing that there was a soldier, a Marine, second lieutenant, being dragged off the battlefield, obviously dead, and it won a Pulitzer Prize photo. And so I decided to look that photograph up, and I did, and I wanted to find out the context of this dead second lieutenant. And what I found was pretty shocking, if you'll allow me to take a minute of this show to talk about it. It's the Battle of Quezon, and they charge this second lieutenant with, hey, skirt the edge of Quezon. All we want to do is find out where the NVA are relative to the base. So just kind of take a patrol, skirt the edge of it, and let's get some feedback. He goes out there, he gets killed, and so does 25 other of his Marines. I mean, almost nobody escaped. They could not get those bodies back for 6 weeks, and they just laid out there and rotted in the sun. So again, that's one patrol, 25 dead. It didn't make the news. Nobody cared. It was just an average day in Vietnam doing the grind. Something like that today, there'd be 10 movies made of it. You know, it just, we are losing our ability to fight a war unless we attach some moral purpose to it. And I think that's one of the reasons that Lincoln was able to ultimately prosecute and win the War of Secession, was by giving it a moral dimension. And that, like you said, better historians than I have written a lot of words about that. But I think that is part of what we're missing nowadays. America's not at war. Somebody said that, America's at the mall. Our military is at war. I was fixing to do a jiu-jitsu roll with somebody recently. He's like, oh, yeah, so you're a retired Marine? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, I would have joined if we had been at war or something like that, man. But it's been pretty cool. And I'm like, you would have joined if we would have been at war? He's like, well, yeah, man, you know what I mean? I'm like, and this guy's like 32. And I'm like, okay, all right, yeah, brother, all right, let's get the roll on. I'm like, where have you been for 20 years? But it just shows to the level of ignorance that the average American has on the subject. And this happened last week. It wasn't years ago. So let's get to the next question. We're coming up on the end of an hour, Dave. So let's shift gears a minute. What do you think the listeners can do to make themselves harder to kill? And I ask that, as you know, of all my guests. What are your thoughts on that?
Rich, as your intern, I've listened to the last 5 shows religiously, and I will say that I've been impressed by the answer to that question every time. But I have not heard one thing that I wanted to hear, only because it matters to me. And here's what it is. I think that, especially for guys of a certain age, right? Recovery is something that I think is critical to anybody who does any kind of training. And let's be honest, the kind of training that AWS does and the kind of community that it attracts does training that is not just physically difficult, it's intellectually difficult, it's emotionally difficult. It takes every part of the system to get it done effectively. It's not just going in and running a 5K or lifting some weights and then calling it a day and getting a hot dog and a hot shower. So when I think about what that means, for me, it means yoga. And not really a huge fan of putting out on Facebook or whatever that I like to do yoga, but yoga really does a lot for me to kind of pull back on the sore back, the sore knees, the tight hamstrings, the tight neck. And frankly, after I just did my VA claim, and anybody who's done a VA claim, you end up starting, well, I'll put in, my broken finger and that earlobe that got chewed off back in Tokyo. And then you end up with 28 different things that you've been kind of massaging along over the last 10 years and covering with Motrin, from bad shoulders to bad back to bad neck, et cetera, et cetera. And really, from the perspective of a guy who would want available police before he got involved in anything, if I'm in a situation, especially what you described talking to Pat last week, where it's highly ambiguous and, hey, operator, you're not in CENTCOM, you don't know the ROE and you could easily ruin your life with a bad call right now. Yeah, I want a gray beard they're with me, helping me navigate through that. Now, having said that, Rich, if something physical is required and Papa needs 20 minutes to warm up so he doesn't tear his meniscus more or his back or whatever, that's not going to work. So when we talk about stuff like readiness, I think part of readiness, at least for me, is spending one of every 4 training hours just kind of mending to the best of my ability what I've worn out. And I got that. For about a year and a half, 2 years, I owned a gym in New Orleans as kind of a side hustle while I was on the staff at Marfil Res. And, I got exposed to kind of the cutting edge of recovery methods. And there's a guy named Donnie Thompson. You can find him on YouTube. Donnie Thompson, in his mid-40s, so my age, totaled 3,000 pounds over 3 power lifts, squat, bench press, and deadlift. So just let that sink in for a minute. And the way he did that was for every hour he trained, he recovered for 2. He did stretching. He hung upside down. He did this horrible thing called body tempering, which is where you take a 145-pound rolling pin and roll it from your neck to the backs of your feet to just get everything moving. But it's astounding to me that a guy my age, there's another guy named Chris Duffin. Chris Duffin, I think last year, the year before, did a challenge where he decided that he was going to squat 800 pounds every day for 30 days. And again, Chris is my age. So the way he did that is he ate collagen, I think, by the pound. He stretched, and he conducted training sessions that were mostly recovery after he went in and got under the bar. So I guess if you ask me what would make you harder to kill, I would say all these guys, especially the guys that you talk to, you got to spend some time on that foam roller. It sucks. Got to spend some time stretching. Got to spend some time, in order to get my back mobilized from some debilitating pain I had back in 2019. I had to spend 2 hours a week at 150 degrees in a sauna, followed by 3 hours of yoga, followed by inversion daily, TENS units, PEMF, you name it. And I'll also tell you, if you want to work out harder and you want to feel like you did when you were in your 30s, maybe even in your 20s, that's the key. Because once you start realizing that how much pain and stiffness you carry around just as a natural habit, you'll start to reset your thermostat in terms of how flexible and how pain-free you can be. And if you feel like $1 million, I think you're going to operate like $100,000 and not $5. So also, Rich, and here's a weird answer to your question, because I was thinking about it yesterday when I was at the grocery. Don't wear flip-flops. And I say that as a degenerate flip-flop wearer, which is what I have on right now. But I was standing in the grocery, and you're working with you has really got me kind of reevaluating my personal practices. I looked down at my ugly ass feet and I thought, if I had to do something, this is the absolute worst footwear short of being barefoot that I could have on to respond. So recover and don't wear flip-flops.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I always chuckle when I travel with some action folks and I look down, they're wearing flip-flops, they're wearing an airport or a train station or something. I'm like, man, if we have to get busy right now, you're going to be in a bad spot. Let's see here. I got some comments I want to get to. Tony asks, why would China ever consider a military movement against its economic backbone? Can you speak to that at all? Because that's always been something I've struggled with. We're not in a nuclear arms race where we have mad, mutually assured destruction with you launch a nuke at me, I'm going to launch all of them at you. But we're in sort of a mad with China economic mutually assured destruction. Or am I making too much of that?
No, and here's where we get into, expert would be all over this. I'm not an expert in China. I did 3 years of working in the salt mines, and I think there's a lot of validity to that question. And you're going to hear a lot about China as the peer competitor and that the whole Thucydides trap, which I encourage you, if you want to know about China, read the Peloponnesian War, because that book is, if you replace Athens and Sparta with the U.S. and China on whatever side you decide who replaces who, you're going to have a reasonable facsimile of the geopolitical reality going on today. I don't, nor would I ever say that the Chinese are actively pursuing a desire for war against us. Although CNN this morning, they were all over, oh my God, Taiwan's about to be landed on, which frankly, that bothers me for two reasons. Number one, that bothers me because the Chinese watch that and think, we think they're going to land on Taiwan, which clicks everything, that clicks the clock back to midnight, 3 seconds closer to midnight. Number two, as we still have troops in contact in Afghanistan, maybe now is not the time to try and expand this out into some global discussion. If it were up to me and I were king for a day, I would keep a laser focus on everybody who could do anything to get the U.S. citizens out so that we can retract our presence back to a safer position. Now, having said that, the key thing to remember about China is that they have a true whole of government capability. You turn on the news and it becomes quite apparent that checks and balances as designed by our forefathers is well and in effect. And even though executive capabilities under POTUS have grown quite a bit, that still doesn't constitute absolute power. Department of State, strikes sparks off. Department of Defense strikes sparks off. Congress, and the hits keep on coming. That is not a reality for the Politburo Security Council or the Chinese government. If they decide that they want to create a certain effect, they will do a true dime response, and everybody will be in complete alignment with the end state, and there will be no walking to a different drum. There will be no political attempts to score points. There will be no congressmen talking on, as though they're a democracy, but there won't be anybody on Instagram tweeting out, hey, I don't agree with this and we should do something different. Everybody will march to the same drum, including the civilian leadership, millionaires, billionaires, you name it. Everybody will do the same thing, and they will say the same thing, and they will execute against the same objective. And that, to me, is the scariest thing about them. There is no friction. And that's why they are so different from us. We operate with checks and balances. They don't have any such thing. If they want to achieve something, whether it be to attack us through the NBA, I think they'll figure out a way to do that pretty easily.
Yeah, they're a master at that. We've talked about that before. You watch people like John Cena or LeBron James that are just, kneeling to the Chinese dollar, as well as Hollywood. There's a Top Gun 2 hasn't come out yet, but when the trailer was released, some eagle-eyed blogger, I think it was, noticed that when Tom Cruise puts his old Maverick jacket on, the Taiwan flag that used to be on his jacket in 1986 has been removed because China, is spent millions of dollars helping produce that movie. And of course, Hollywood bowed to their wishes of taking that flag off because they don't recognize Taiwan's sovereignty. So just they're very focused on anything, and they will influence us in ways that we cannot imagine. And again, to Tony's point about why would China do that? Well, for starters, yes, we're a big economy, but we're only 4.25% of the world population. America is. So if they lose 4.25% and they can gobble up the rest of the world, who cares? I think because they're looking at the longer game, just like the trillions of dollars in mineral wealth in Afghanistan. They've been courting the Taliban for years. It's not just recently. China has been making side deals with the Taliban from the things that I've been reading. And they're going to extract, I think, 80 or 90% of the world's lithium, if I'm not mistaken, is there. And of course, you need that to make batteries. And of course, this is the future. And like you said, Dave, and this is probably the most important thing about China, I think, is the point you made about the lockstep. When they say go, it's all go. Here in America, we would vacillate on it. We would think about it. We'd march in the street about it. We'd get pissed off about it. There'd be people that didn't want to go, some that did want to go, some that don't know what's going on. They're not going to have that problem. And that's a benefit of an autocratic country that we will never understand. I want to take on a couple of other comments here, Dave, while I have you on here. Chad says patriotism is something that carried us through war, and we're lacking it now. I agree with that. Jason says war should be a moral conundrum. The cause should be so universally supported, or nearly so, by the people of the nation that they are willing to hurt and supportive of each other's pain in order to accomplish the goal. And I think that's part of the problem. You know, if you look back on our history, President Roosevelt lost sons in the war. You know, we had American presidents, their children went off to fight. We had conscription here in the country until 1973, 74. And everybody shared in this pain and suffering of the war. But since the all-volunteer force was enacted, you know, now, gosh, almost 50 years ago, there's only a small sliver of society, that 1% that volunteers to serve, that takes any of the pain of the war. So you can have people say, yeah, I would have joined if we'd been at war. You can have that kind of mentality because nobody feels it, nobody sees it. Chad also mentions cough, cough, Original Strength for the Tactical Athlete. It's for sale on Amazon. Chad, of course, wrote that book, Original Strength for the Tactical Athlete. And then he talks a lot about the things that you're mentioning, Dave, as far as recovery. Let's see. Michael Gentili says, flawed thinking. If I were the Chinese, removing a competitor and getting unlimited access to the resources and markets is worth it, especially with their disdain for human life. Ryan says, we're worried about China fighting us while they're focusing on buying us. Dr. Fuller says, totalitarian governments are good at fighting wars, always have been. Yeah, and Ryan, this is another interesting point. Attorneys are not making military decisions in China. Well said. I believe I have one final question for you, sir, and that is, can you speak to what's going on with Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller? Do you have any thoughts on that? Can you tell us what we have seen for those who have been asleep or living under a rock in the last week?
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Scheller is the battalion commander of the Advanced Infantry Training Battalion at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, which is part of the chain of SOI East, SOI being School of Infantry. So as I understand it, he gets the kind of the cream of the crop that come out of SOI and runs them through AIT, which would put him in the position to be the guy who sees some of the youngest Marines that we have going forward into the toughest operational situations. He's the one who sends the young grunts to the battalions and after training them. Lieutenant Colonel Scheller came on Facebook. I think it was Facebook, last week. And he made a video. And what he said was, I've been at war for 17 years as a Marine infantryman. He made an allusion to the difficulty of being a commander in the Marine Corps. And then he basically threw down the gauntlet to the Marine Corps leadership and said, how is it that I am held to such a high standard when I see senior leadership creating situations like we see in Afghanistan right now? I'd like to know who's getting held accountable for that. That is a watershed statement. It's going to be quite a while before I fully wrap my head around it. I will say that I am of two minds about it, and then I'm not going to comment too much on it. But I think Lieutenant Colonel Scheller made a very big boy decision, and I think there's, he's already been relieved for cause, which I think he fully expected, and I think, I don't think he would even disagree that would be what happened. I don't know. It is indicative of frustration on all sides. And again, all I will say in regards to that particular issue, Rich, is that we still have troops in contact right now. And if we're going to be talking about something or focusing on something, then I guess my personal opinion is let's focus on whatever creates more pressure at the various agencies, such that security is increased, AMSITs are processed more rapidly, and we can pull the fuck out of Afghanistan as rapidly as humanly possible. And then we will spend the next 2, 3, 5 decades running after actions on our choices and what the NSC did and what the generals did, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Who Shot John is just going to take us a century to get through. Right now, I guess I would say, got it. When's the next flight that pulls the 13 Marines that are bound for another attack out of there quick? And let's get the reset going. And that's it. Over.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw he put out a 10-minute statement last night. Have you had an opportunity to see that?
I have
yet?
not seen that. No.
Yeah. I'll read you an excerpt from it because I shared it this morning. He said last night, Dave, in the 10-minute thing, he gave his speech in front of a chessboard, which I thought was pretty metaphorical. And he said, my next move is I'm going to resign my commission. I think that's the only honorable thing to do. I was relieved for cause. He, of course, said, like you said, Dave, that he saw that coming. That was a foregone conclusion. Even if he would have made that statement, say, hey, I'm Stu Scheller, and just wearing a polo shirt like this on the golf course, he still would have been fired. But to do it from his office in his utility uniform, he knew he was going to get smoked. So last night he puts out this statement, 10 minutes long, but I'm going to read you just a quick excerpt. When he said, I'm resigning my commission, I'm going to lose all my VA disability, I'm going to lose my retirement worth millions of dollars. And he said, quote, I don't need a single dollar. I just need every single person that's willing to go back outside the wire every single day to wear a blue collar and just go into work every single day and feed their families. Those are the people that I need. Follow me and we will bring the whole fucking system down. I am honorable, and you can ask any Marine who served with me for 17 years. I dare you to ask them all and find out what I'm made of. We're just getting started, end quote. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. But he is very sincere in his words and his statements. So, and I think there's probably thousands of Stu Schellers out there wearing a uniform right now, whether that's a fire department uniform or a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine uniform, or a law enforcement uniform that sees some of the things going on in this country and have been getting very upset with it for quite some time now. I could be wrong, but that's my opinion. I think Stu Scheller may just be the canary in the coal mine. What do you think?
I guess, Rich, I would say I sense the same degree of frustration that you do. I also, though, see a huge requirement for leadership, and let me explain that. And you saw the same. I think I saw it on your Facebook feed. Basically, the juxtaposition of the comment that Dan Crenshaw made in response to Vice News's statement that on the same day that the Marines got killed, that the predominance of was it white supremacy or something
neo-Nazis
comes from the United States Marine Corps.
Yeah.
That is a hard pill to swallow, I think, not just from a Marine perspective, but from any DOD, et cetera, perspective. What concerns me, and I'm going to I'm going to kind of take the middle road here and say what concerns me is that emotions have gotten high enough to where now we have lost probably one of our very gifted top 10% battalion commanders because his emotions ran high and nobody was around to talk him off the ledge before he made that decision. And I don't know Lieutenant Colonel Scheller personally, but you don't get to be where he is because you're a dirtbag. You get to be where he is because you're kind of a top 5% human being. And it makes me ache in my chest that this guy is talking about resigning a commission that I can only imagine he earned through blood, sweat, and tears. And then he's talking about walking away from the Marine Corps when he's probably the type of human being that we want to keep in the Marine Corps and push upward. I'm not going to be his apologist. He made a decision that took him across the Rubicon. And quite frankly, there's no way back from something like that. But speaking to the level of frustration, especially with the junior guys, as I was sitting, and I came here from being an executive officer, so I kind of got to be the complaints department. My enemy was that emotion because I do not want, especially the young Marines, and you got to remember the Marine Corps, I think, is 40% vaccinated right now. I can't remember what the exact measure is. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of aggravation, all of which I think the Commandant is sensitive to. But the worst possible outcome is attrition of these excellent young Americans on the basis of an emotional outburst, that may have had an alternative solution later down the road.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was just kind of looking at, what we lost. And because I think his point about accountability is incredibly important, especially coming from the Marine Corps. When I was an instructor at the School of Infantry, if one of my privates would have lost his lensatic compass on the navigation course, I might have got smoked for it over one lensatic compass that cost probably $27. And here we have lost all, let's forget about the 600,000 weapons. Let's forget about the artillery pieces. Let's forget about the 2,000 armored personnel. We've lost biometric data on a lot of folks over there. We lost all kinds of stuff that intelligence related that is going to be a problem for us for decades to come. Who's been held accountable for that?
Let me answer that question in a different, and that may have been rhetorical, Rich, but let me kind of respond to that. And I'll say this, I'm closing 23 years in the Marine Corps, and I have met General Dunford several times. I've met General Kelly. I worked with General Tulin very closely, General Roebling, General Dana, you name it. And I have seen enough general officers, at least in the United States Marine Corps, to where I can say I have never met one that I thought was not sensitive to the accountability that he faced or the having to live with the decisions he'd made. I can understand the point that the nation doesn't feel like certain groups are being held accountable for actions. And again, that's going to come over the next 20, 30 years. I mean, there's going to, the mountain of books that's about to get written about what we're going through right now is legion.
Yeah.
I have never though felt that at least in the Marine Corps, and I've met generals from other services, but I only talk about the Marine Corps, that any human being that I met who got to the rank of general wouldn't be, you can take him before a congressional committee, you can ask him all sorts of questions, but quite frankly, he's going to be the type of human being where he's going to prefer that to the fact when he's sitting alone in a dark room, reliving the decisions that he made. And I haven't met the kind of guy who would blow that off and say, well, screw it, did that, didn't work out. Oh, well, well, what happens after that is who knows, but they have always been the kind of person that has the accountability baked into the cake, so to speak, if that makes sense.
It totally does. And I absolutely agree with you. After 23 years, the general officers that I rubbed shoulders with were absolutely top shelf, not just military leaders, not just professional top shelf, but I mean, human beings. They were amazing Americans, amazing human beings. I don't have anything negative to say about a single one of them. What I will say is they're only as good as the elected leader that tells them what they're allowed to do. So again, I think the buck has to stop with our elected leaders on this particular thing, and I think we're also seeing something new also in the American culture, and that is the General Petraeuses of the world. And he's just one of many that are now stepping in and giving their color commentary on what's going on. I don't think we had that in World War II. I don't think we had that in Korea, Vietnam, where you'd have some general on the news with Walter Cronkite second guessing Westmoreland's decisions. And even still, Westmoreland was only as good as what Johnson would allow him to do. But of course, he took the responsibility for the fall of Vietnam, whether or not it was his to take. I'll get to some of the questions, Dave, and then we can close it out, or some of the comments here. Chad says, I disagree with his decision, talking about Lieutenant Colonel Scheller's decision, which I have stated elsewhere why I disagree with that. But I'd like to have more info and background on him to know better why he did what he did. Chad goes on to say the Pentagon, of course, Chad is a retired civil affairs soft guy from the Army. He says the Pentagon and Department of Defense won't spare one breath on him, but he and his family have lost the lifetime of pension and benefits. I hope it works out for him. Chad goes on to say, SecDef Austin was my battalion and brigade commander at one time and was loved as a commander, but you don't get to that level without being political. True. Dr. Phyllis says, Petraeus, well, prison changes a man. Yes, it does. Johnny King says, I think the S is silent in elected leaders. Yeah. Closing thoughts, sir.
I want to give the benefit of the doubt. I'm just going to say two things as we sit and kind of go through this, and I'm only speaking for myself. Anytime that I decide that I'm going to throw darts or stones at any of the leadership right now, to include POTUS, I have to kind of take a minute and say, Dave, you've been in the Marine Corps for 23 years. And at some point, for me, 10 years ago, 13 years ago, I have to stop saying that I'm not a Lance Corporal. I'm they now. I'm part of the leadership that has carried the Marine Corps over the last 2 decades. And I have to ask myself, what did I do or fail to do that could have at least made some difference to the current situation we're in? So I'm very leery about ascribing blame, only because I have to take a chunk of that blame on my own shoulders because I've been in the Marine. It's not like I was sitting on the sidelines unaware that the war was happening. Having said that, and I kind of see the ship turning from a nation that was in love with its military. And I think to some extent it still is, but it may be starting to question that military, just to kind of give you a sense of the internal dynamics. The first day, I was at Naval War College. We had many speakers, authors, you name it. But the largest of those was David Petraeus, who came in and he gave us a talk, geopolitics, the future. He entertained many different questions, all very good. I will never forget this. He was the last speaker of the day, and the admiral, whose name I cannot recall, he has since been relieved, got up to the podium to kind of close out the ceremony, and he lambasted the student body. He utterly lambasted the student body for not having the moral courage to ask General Petraeus about the effect of his moral turpitude and his decisions upon not only his own leadership, but upon our nation. And I have always kind of felt like that reset anytime I have a view that, oh, it's just the general sitting up there cashing in chips on bodies because, that's what they do and that's how they got there. I think back to that, and I think about what happens behind closed doors and the amount of times I've seen generals hold each other accountable. What happens outside once they get to the Department of State, I have no idea. But I will continue to be impressed with at least the Marine generals that have made it to their leadership position, and I will be proud that I had service with them.
Yeah, you said something, Dave, that really reminded me of our time together back on recruiting duty. And I remember several inspections that we stood, whether it was a district inspection team or a region inspection team, and they'd come in, and some of the things that they would say, like, why have you guys been doing this? I'm like, well, first of all, I can tell you that as a staff officer, I recommended against this COA, and the commander chose to do it. So I have ruthlessly executed his decision. His wishes became my marching order. And you just have to live with that. And that's why, again, I say the accountability has to stop well. I know that there are a lot of people advising our elected leadership on what is and is not the right course of action. And they will go, yeah, that's great. I appreciate your opinion there, General Brothers. Now sit down and suck on your thumb and do what I told you to do. I mean, you and I know that I think people that haven't been in the military don't understand that that's what you get told sometimes. You can have the best staff, but if the commander decides to drive his command off the cliff or his nation off a cliff, that's where you get to plot the course as a staff officer. Roger that, sir. Here we go. This is the shortest distance to get off the cliff. And I'll have medical personnel waiting at the bottom in case there are any survivors. But you don't get a vote. You can resign or execute as an officer. As enlisted folks, and I was an enlisted guy for a long time, all the way to gunnery sergeant, you have many devices at your disposal, whether it's request mass that you can take your cause and your concerns up the chain of command, all the way to the commandant, and they will hear you out. As an officer, you have one. Well, actually two. You can execute or resign. And so for Stu Scheller, he's going to resign. And maybe that's the best thing because he can get in and start running for office like some other folks like Dan Crenshaw that are this new breed of veteran that realize if we're going to have any meaningful change, it has to start with the elected leadership. Let me take a couple more questions, Dave, and then we'll really close it out this time. Jeff said, I have had my mouth muzzled for 28 years. That's how long my brother Jeff was in service to this nation, 28 years, and earned my current voice. Yeah, Semper Fi. We're getting some crunchy volume there, Dave. Dr. Phillips says, people ask me what the best part of being retired is. My response, I got my First Amendment rights back. Yeah. Did you catch that, Dave?
Rich, I'm starting to have technical problems. I think I'm going to have to drop a little bit early.
Yeah, no problem, brother. Thanks for being on this morning. And while Lieutenant Colonel Brothers leaves us, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us this morning. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. A couple of retired Marine Corps officers discussing some geopolitics, which we have no right to do other than we're just exercising our First Amendment rights, as Dr. Fuller said. Yako out there from South Africa said, how is it? Gauss is great show, Rich. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for tuning in to another show here on Coffee with Rich. It's been my honor and privilege to be with you this morning. You guys stay safe and remember the fight is coming. Be ready.